Hi, this is a presentation on ethnomathematics, which is a multicultural phenomenon. My name is Claude Bernard. I am the author and narrator. The disclaimer. This presentation on ethnomathematics is based on my thesis from graduate school a few years ago, in which I talked about the multicultural nature of mathematics and the Eurocentric presumption labeled to it. I'll briefly talk about ethnomathematics, Eurocentrism, and how that relates to the education system in formerly colonized, enslaved, and economically dependent countries such as Haiti. To do so, names of individuals, regions, and countries might be referenced to only incorrectly refer to those who had deliberately engaged in the process of taking ownership of the development of mathematics, but to also give credit to those who acknowledge the beauty of ethnomathematics or the multicultural dimension embedded in it, in mathematics. What is ethnomathematics? It is the acknowledgement that mathematics is a multicultural phenomenon. What we know as mathematics is the compilation of humanity's ongoing creativity. The concepts developed therein are tainted with cultural and environmental conditioning. The intellectual father of ethnomathematics, Ubiratan D'Ambrosio, he is a Brazilian. He argues that it invites us to look into how knowledge was built throughout history in different cultural environments. It is a comparative study of the techniques, modes, arts, and styles of explaining, understanding, learning about, and coping with the reality in different natural and cultural environments. He contends further the complexity of every society, so different one from another, is responsible for the generation of codes, norms, rules, and values in the direction of organizing, classifying, comparing, and ordering the action of its individuals. Since I mentioned the Eurocentrism in mathematics, I shall go over how Europe did not give birth to mathematics. Just like any other culture, any other region, any other country, you'll find Europe with its contribution to the beauty of this subject called mathematics. It bears the imprint of many cultures. However, as humanity evolved from Africa, one can easily understand why many of the initial concepts came from that region. Nonetheless, as humans spread throughout the planet, they built their societies based on their own mathematical perception and understanding of their surroundings. Societal challenges arose and required adjustments to cope with evolutionary demands deemed necessary, and that is true throughout the planet. The Egyptians, they contributed a whole lot in what we are using currently. We shall see that as we move forward with this presentation. And I'll also elaborate on different groups mentioned on here just to bring some clarification. The Babylonians, the people whom now we can associate with Iraq or Baghdad as the capital. They came up with a whole series of contributions that things that could be associated to them. We have the days of the week. We have other concepts that we will advance in this presentation that you shall see. The Indians, the notion of zero, for example. The Mayans too had a good perception, a good notion of what zero was supposed to be. The Mayans are the individuals you would say, or the groups of folks who are originated from Mexico, parts of Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and so on. You also have the Incas. The Incas are comprised of from Chile to Peru and Ecuador. The Akan people. The Akan people are the ones whom you would regard as Ghana, geographically on the west coast of Africa. It used to be called as per the people who invaded it and the wealth they were gathering from it. It used to be called the Gold Coast. And many other groups worked on issues that were important to help advance their societies. They were not dependent on a specific region to hand them a piece of the pie. On the contrary, they were the foundations upon which much else came to be built. Multicultural interactions caused others to borrow from each other and did not have to reinvent the wheels. Here's the Lubumbo bone is a mathematical artifact that is found on the border of Swaziland and South Africa. This is a bone that has been retrieved by archaeologists around the 1970s. It's about 35,000. It's been dated about 35,000 years ago. This had the its mark. It's got 29 notches on it, which is a reflection of a lunar month. And speculations are it could be associated to the menstrual period that women have to undergo normally, biologically, in in all parts of the world. Uh, a lunar a lunar month is considered to be 29 days for the whole cycle from full moon to from full moon up back again to full moon. So that cycle is about 29 days, 5 hours, and 44 minutes. The next we have is the Ishango bone. The Ishango bone is found up to today in the in Belgium. And the rationale behind having these artifacts in Belgium, supposedly Belgium owned the Congo, the resources, the people, not to talk about the crimes against humanity that the King of Belgium, Leopold II, had caused over there. Within a period of 10 years alone, more than 10 million people might have perished under his command. But this artifact was found to have about, I believe, 55 to 59 notches on them. That was a form of registering different accounts of things that were relevant to their societies. It was in the 19, I believe it was in the 1930s that these things, or 1950s, they were retrieved by archaeologists. It was dated about 8 to 10,000 years, but it was redated uh, and they found it to be rather, instead of 8 to 10,000 years, it was about 20,000 years old. Also, you have the what you call the wolf bone, which was found in Czechoslovakia. It's dated to be about 30,000 years old. Here is also the mathematical artifact found in Egypt when Mr. Rind, a former student in the 1850s in Egypt, who went to Egypt from England, and he purchased this papyrus, which had about 112 problems with their solutions on there. This was put together apparently around 1600, in the 1600, 1700 before Common Era. Now, here we are with the repetition of the days of the week. These are borrowed concepts. The days of the week are initially can be attributed to the Babylonians. And from there, they used the zodiac signs for that matter. And from there, the Indians picked them up and they got spread with the help it got spread through India and also got spread through the religion of Hindu. And Hinduism at that time, well, it still is considered to be one of the oldest religion on earth. So with them, that concept was spread. And then upon leaving Babylonia, the Jewish people picked that with them and used it as the tenet of their religion themselves. And then through the Jewish, um, you have Christianity and Muslims that also picked up on that. And then that's the whole notion of what we now know as the 7 days of the week are came to be established. So they didn't have to reinvent the wheels. Now we need to understand that this is just a perception or it's a conventional thing. There had been countries with a different time perception of they could have been four. Some of them had four. Some of them had 11. They didn't have to be 7 days. So it's just a construct that had been spread to establish itself as if this is it. Now algebra, which also came from this Mohammed um, Musa in his book that carried the name Algebra, in which he talked about he was someone who talked about the distribution of lanes and other aspects. He was also, I believe, um, uh, well, at his time, he was a genius. Put it that way. Um, you also have the zero concept, which apparently was introduced by it's known to have been introduced by the Indians. But apparently, the Mayans also had a good notion of what the zero concept was. Um, these are among a plethora of mathematical concepts that we take for granted. The base 60, for example, is another concept that had been picked up from the Sumerians, and the Sumerians are from the southern part of what we now call Iraq, as it relates to minutes, seconds, or degrees. These things are not European inventions. The Gregorian calendar is based on the Julian calendar, which itself was based on the Egyptian calendar. Now, that calendar, the Gregorian calendar, which picked up from the Julian calendar, I believe, was established under the kingdom of Julius Caesar around 48 before Common Era and carried over all the way down to the uh, um, 16th century, late 15th century. In fact, it became official in 1582 when many countries adopted it because of the work they had done in in having making sure the religious celebrations were exactly at the dates and the seasons in which they were supposed to fall. So initially, in order for them to get to it started when it was supposed to be October 4th, 1582. It got automatically transferred to, it was about 10 days. So it became October 14th the next day. Countries that had adopted it twice in its history is France. The French initially adopted it at around the same time because of the power of the church and its hegemony on so many different countries that it had its impact. So France adopted it, and then after the revolution, they adopted a different calendar, the Republican calendar, because they wanted to do away with the church and some of the privileges that people from the church had, and through their revolution, they wanted to change that. It wasn't until Napoleon on a January 1st he decided on reverting back to the Gregorian calendar. Um, so England also took its time to adopt the calendar. It was not put into effect until around 1750, 1751, 1752. In fact, the law got passed around 1751 and became in effect around 1752, in which case it was 11 days for them at that point. And workers who did not quite understand the implications or how those changes took place were demanding that they got paid for the 11 days in which they felt like they were cheated out of. But in fact, it was not so. All right. So that was based on the Julian calendar itself was based on the Egyptian calendar. But that was not the only region on Earth that had a system, a calendric system. The Mayans also had their own calendar systems. They had, in fact, two different ones as far as the calendar. They had the first calendar they called the round calendar round, which comprised of a 260-day sacred year and a 365-day sacred year. So they had those types of calendars to keep track of time for their societies and for them um, to take into consideration how they perform their daily activities and their religious activities as well, especially that. And the restitution, you also talking about the Mayans, they were a great society. In fact, they came up with they were producing rubber products about 3,000 years before Charles Goodyear received his patent in 1843 in Connecticut. So the Mayans were a great society. They even up to now were using technological mineral called mica to for they used to build complicated looms for weaving cloth and devise a rainbow of glittery paints that was made from mica, a mineral that still has technological uses today. All right, so the restitution of the flooded land from the Nile River back to their rightful owners was due to the system of rope stretchers or geometry. The Nile River used to flood over the lands of individuals in Egypt. So the best way for them to reconstruct the 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 landscape and re and give back the land to the rightful owners, they use the rope stretchers. And this is what Mr. Thales, who was a Greek person, witnessed and was impressed by the mathematical process that they used to give back the land to their proper owners, which was in essence what you would now use as geometry. The engineering system behind the pyramids speaks volume of the monolithic nature of the structures and the complexity of the mathematical calculations involved in the process. For after millennia, they still stand. So the pyramids are they have been there for thousands of years. The Mayans also were good at building their own. In fact, the Mayans left behind one of them in which you have the four facades. Each of them has 91, 91 steps in which it's putting together you it even if you include the last steps it's about the 365 days of the year. Because of those who design the curriculum, the sort of understanding is that they carry a Eurocentric signature. Indeed, former colonizers and many of those who control the world's economy have disingenuously led a great many to believe that mathematics is a Eurocentric affair. The World Wide Web, in essence, is not new. With the advent of technological tools, continental distances have become virtually and immeasurably insignificant. New channels of communication make human interactions nearly instantaneous. But a few centuries ago, multicultural exchanges, appropriation by force of new inventions, and plagiarism were rampant. Intellectual piracy laws were non existent. Powerful countries, through invasion and colonization, take ownership in others' inventions while glorifying themselves. Hence the notion of racism, quote unquote racism, because this is a social construct, had helped dispossess the enslaved, the colonized, or the weaker regions from their inventions, be they in mathematics or other subjects. Yes, um, you have a whole array of subjects and other, and especially mathematics, in which people have taken advantage of their of the fact that they were putting some other people under slavery. They were able to control their inventions. They were able to take ownership in the things that they created, and a lot of them had just gone unnoticed as if they never created anything and ownership had been taken. But we see that in a few more slides. Countries that handed their education systems to their former enslavers ended up forming their citizens as foreigners living within their own land, as in the case of Haiti and many other formerly enslaved and or colonized nations. Eurocentrism in mathematics. Just as in countless other academic areas such as religion or history, mathematics especially has been hijacked as if its development mainly started with the Greeks and later disseminated to the rest of Europe. And from there, through colonization and enslavement of other societies, came the introduction and familiarity with the subject. We've learned of the so-called theorem of Pythagoras, the plurality of Aristotle, and a whole array of endless fabrications to centralize mathematics into a specific region. Now, going back to that paragraph, um, came the in familiarity with. We've learned of the so-called theorem of Pythagoras, but before I get to the theorem of Pythagoras, there are about for the last past 500 years, there are about between 5 to 6,000 cultures, and it's hard to define culture as per one's only perception of what it is. But culture is heavily has a great deal to do with a group of people living together, um, their habits, the things that they do to advance their societies. There's not one culture that is really static. Cultures are pretty much dynamic. They get influenced by this, they get influenced by that. With new generations, things come up all the time. So there could not have been a situation in which only one region would be the father of everything that people would need to know in terms of mathematics from which it would derive. Now, arriving at the theorem of Pythagoras, this is not his theorem. Pythagoras, on the suggestion of Thales, he was recommended to the priests of those temples, where pretty much you could call them universities or schools per se. They he was he studied in Egypt, and then after that he went to well he I think he was taken away by with the invasion of the Babylonians. He got taken away to Babylonia and had spent about 10 to 12 years there. He learned a whole lot while he was in either side of those two countries. He had not left anything written to which you would associate these to him in terms of the theorem. There was something that was even there in Babylonia for over 1,000 years, his so-called theorem. So when he went back to Greece, the ones that the students whom he was tutoring or teaching, he did not leave anything in writing for them to have given him the credit that he was the one who came up with it. So what he was regurgitating was pretty much things that he had learned while he was away. In addition to that, there's also the plurality of Aristotle in the context of he had written a whole lot of different books in highly sophisticated subjects such as astronomy, astrology, philosophy, and so many other areas that would require a whole lot of studying or many years of, even for one subject, it would take a whole lot to for that to be mastered. What truly happened was his father, well, not Aristotle's father, Alexander's father, who was Philip of Macedonia. He too became the great because the more you invade, the more people could claim you are the great. So Alexander was not known to have been the great not until he invaded Egypt around 320 something. Now, when that happened, he became to be known as Alexander the Great, but he was not the great before. Now, Alexander, when he invaded Egypt, took away as much as he could and transferred them over to Aristotle. Aristotle had the audacity to gleefully put his name under a whole lot of those books. A whole lot of them, he put his names, and to the point where uh, a few hundred years later, you heard that he had written about 800 books. 200 years later, it was 400. And another 100 years later, it was about 200, and so on until it was deciphered that these books were not really his. They didn't bear his signature. He could not have been able to master these to the extent that he would be able to write all of those books in those areas. Many societies' contributions have been lost in ownership and the non-written ones disregarded by those who had and continue to have the power to gleefully do so. Yes, you have a whole lot of other contributions that have been lost. Like I said earlier, there are so many, even in the past 500 years, again, we got about 5 to 6,000 cultures. And all of those cultures were not dependent upon just one of them to for everything to be filtered through them. Every culture has that intrinsic characteristic to develop things for their societies, for their groups, for the ones who are living amongst them. Always been like that, and it's still like that. Had not it been for Eurocentrism through invasions of other countries, invasions of other cultures, to influence them to the point where of making their own societies or their own cultures look meaningless, and or disposes them of the things that they had come up with and take ownership with in them. That's the nature of mostly powerful countries when they invade others. Okay. Now it's gonna be pretty much kind of a sad story talking about the school system in Haiti. But hey, it is what it is. So it's okay. It's not anybody's fault in the process. Haiti is one of the many countries that have adopted a system of education from its former enslavers. Haiti's cultural values are not embedded anywhere in its curriculum. For generations, administrations never reflected on this issue up to today. So the distorted curriculum has nothing to do with the realities of that society. The market system functions completely outside of the school system, which itself was handed over to the Vatican and to French Christian authorities. known as FIC, by then President Jefford in 1860, who also despised the cultural values of his constituents of African ancestry. That was one of the worst and debilitating decisions that that administration had inflicted upon its citizens. From then on, the miseducation system has never taken a break. Now, I have, I feel compelled to elaborate on what I have just said. The FIC, which stands for Frères de l'Instruction Chrétienne, or French Christian authorities, pretty much, that's who they were. And President Jefford was, in 1860, the president, and he handed over to the Vatican the right to take over the education system in Haiti, besides other benefits that the Vatican received from that government. He was Jeffrey himself was as the Spaniards came up with that notion of a mulatto in terms of someone who was born of an enslaved individual and a white person, which is kind of this is a name that carries a negative connotation, considering that you have a mule that that is the procreate of a donkey and a horse. So it's not a beautiful title to call someone a mulatto. It's kind of derogatory. It's not beautiful. It's not nice. But this is who he was. It might have been his grandmother, his great grandmother, who might have been enslaved. So he had no connections with the enslavement that was that was that we came to know, that a lot of us ancestors experienced. So he was not a direct enslaved person himself. So his ancestry, he was giving much more weight to his European ancestry. So his hatred for the African ancestry was present in his administration, in his behavior, in so many other negative things that belittled the cultural values of people of African um, descent. And so he handed over that to the Vatican, and the Vatican was so happy to take over and made sure that was that they request anyway as conditions to acknowledge that this country had gained its independence and that it could live like that. So to eradicate the African values from formerly African born citizens and newly Haitian citizens, they were more than happy to make sure that they wipe out everything African out of our citizens. So they took over, and ever since, the miseducation system had started. So citizens of Haiti receive a foreign education without leaving their homeland. You don't have to go anywhere. We're bringing you something that we deem to be the way to go for you. We're going to cook you something and we're going to feed you with it and we'll destroy you a little bit at a time, meaning one generation at a time. My grandfather, um, my great grandfather went, those who were able to go to school, they studied pretty much the same nonsense that I had studied back in high school myself. Nothing had been changed to the extent where you would feel, oh, it had evolved. Up to today, we're still using FIC books in the school system in which they really demonized our ancestors. This book has no respect for anything um, African, anything Haitian, written by Jean-Claude Dorsainville. It's a very negative book. No references as to where the information embedded in that book had been found. No such thing. It's take it as it is. They even tell you that from the beginning to the end of the book. It's a whole lot of nonsense in that book. It's unfortunate that this book is still being in use in the school system in Haiti. Sorry to admit, but that's what it is. The recipients of that miseducation system have come to believe that they represent the intellectual elite of the country. It is customary to hear an individual who graduated from high school to say that he or she has completed his education, whereas it's rather the school system that has taken its time to destroy him. And rightfully so, because nothing that those kids studied in the school system had been designed to produce a Haitian citizen. Um, we studied stuff that had nothing to do with us, and then we came to the extent because we are we had been privileged enough in the context of not having so many people to have had the same opportunities to go to school. We came to think that because we had been to school, so we are different from our neighbors or from our brothers and sisters who had not had the chance to do so, or even our own parents. We turned to the point where we are a foreign product right in their face. We have nothing to do with the things they practice. We have nothing to do with the culture they came from. No inheritance whatsoever, to the exception of just minor few of us, but nothing as a result of the curriculum. So the school system has rather destroyed people as opposed to forming them as citizens of the country. Students get to study academic materials that are not in accord with their realities and cultural values. They benevolently and ironically become volunteers to the French Academy within the confine of Haiti. Even when they are speaking in Creole, their expressions must be tainted with grammatically accepted connotation of the French language. One can easily be labeled or identified as someone who received little to no education if one fails to pronounce a U where it was expected in a word that spells with a U in French. Meaning, pronounce if you were to pronounce an I in lieu of a U or an A in terms of an E with an accent, instead of the EUR, that would be enough to corroborate that perception that you had not been to school. It's unfortunate. People as if had that legitimate right to feel it's okay to look down on you, or to talk to you in a very condescending way and make you feel that you're not up to where they are because they had been privileged enough to have been to school. For fear of being viewed as illiterate, that conformity becomes fair game even to those who are not enrolled in the miseducation system. So this is something that permeates every, pretty much almost a lot of our citizens who had not had a chance to go to school. Sometimes they try themselves to connect with the perception that if you say something that gives a feel as if you, underneath the language that you're speaking, you know French. So that could be good enough for you to feel on the societal scale to have some weight that people can at least not looking cannot look down upon you just because you seem to know a little bit that flashes your presence in school at some point. So people who don't know those words tend to get mixed up with them and say the wrong stuff at times, and and they look even worse than that. At times one can easily discern where the confusion that permeates a speaker's manner of speech originated from, and I've just elaborated on that. That tendency has earned a great many the inflated title of intellectual and a radical displacement from the rest of the population that did not have the privilege to receive a high school education. That displacement has resulted in the citizen functioning as utterly disconnected from the culture and daily realities. Displacement in terms of people who have no connections with their culture whatsoever in the things that they've studied. You could be living near the ocean. Your school has nothing to do with the environment in which you are learning what it is that you're learning. No such thing. The school system is totally focused on a strict curriculum provided by a group that has nothing to do with the culture of the country. Not only they don't have anything to do with it, but have proven years, generation of over generations of their hatred for everything African. One must admit that's not the fault of those who unfortunately got caught up in the destructive scheme of the FIC to deprive the citizen from their cultural identity. that was there. It's not the fault of those who were subjected to it, because parents felt it, they didn't have the chance for them to have been to school. That would be the echelon for them to move up to in order for them to be able to perform well in society, being able to produce and do well. People shy away from agriculture because this is being done by the peasants. This is being done by the people from the far side, the countryside. Therefore, they're not going to get involved in something where people who are not educated enough for them to communicate with or to talk to feel as if they have something foreign to talk about. Anything countrywide that has to do with the country is considered to be inferior. So there's nothing in there for them. The market system is absent within the education system in Haiti. What one learns from school could best be applied in a Western culture. Indeed, there's nothing that you've learned that in the country that you could feel as if, oh, okay, this is really country like. I've learned how to do many things that relate to the way our parents, our ancestors operated. No such connection. That's probably the rationale behind many Haitians' academic excellence in Western countries' education systems. When we come here or we go to other countries, we tend to perform well in an education system that you would think would be foreign to us. But in a sense, we have adapted to a system of education in which we feel, oh, wait a minute. All we need to make sure we do is that adapt to the way they do things, because that's pretty much what we had done even back home. It's as if we were on a foreign land in terms of the education system itself. At school, students learn about pounds um, in terms of leave, but the only aspect to using that unit in the market system is when you're buying um, uh, coffee to export, raw coffee. If it's not raw, it could be something that you just put together and traded, not in terms of powder, but you coffee were used in that balance in terms of leaf or pounds. Then those units, meters, distances between foreign locations and other units, but nothing that relates to the day-to-day market activities inside the country. What I mean by distances between foreign locations, it's as if you would have a problem in which you would you would try to calculate the distance a train would take to either depart or arrive from New York or to New York, to or from Chicago, for example. These are things that you you wonder why, because we don't have anything, we don't have such thing as trains in Haiti. Anyway, meanwhile, the various unit systems used in the market system continue to be dismissed by the curriculum. And here are a few examples of units used in trading goods at the market but are not even acknowledged by the school system in Haiti. The unit mamit alone has a variety of subunits, such as timamit, in terms of a small one, demi, which we call half mamit, and one full, which is yon mamit. They are used in produce such as rice, grinded corn, peas or beans, flour, sugar, etc. At times, those units are called guo or timami. And you, as a buyer, as a customer, you have to be on the lookout if you people know these things pretty well, because you have to make sure you're buying from a standard mamit, standard in terms of what you can verify to be something in which it's not the timamit. Sometimes you can be fooled, or that's what people do anywhere anyway. It's not something that's peculiar to Haiti in the process. Their equivalence in pound is unknown, inexistent, let alone to be important enough to convert. They do not convert these into units in the school system to convert for students to learn and be able to connect with the schools with the market system in Haiti. There's no such thing. Another significant unit used in the market system is gloss, which serves to measure thick liquid such as cooking oil. In that unit too, one finds demi, meaning half, demi gloss, ion gloss, as in a full gloss, a full bottle of that unit. Bouteille, which is kind of a bottle, is an is another alternative unit to measure capacity, such as honey, Cremas, it's alcohol, along with other marketable liquid. There's also the unit called Ka. Um, well, it's there's also the measuring. It's a measuring thing that you could use at a Ka, which is one fourth a Ka of a whole unit of capacity. Yon Ka is like one quart. Trois Ka is like three quarters of l'huile is oil, or tafia, which is alcohol. None of these that you see on here is in the school system, whereas the whole country is using just that, except the school system. So total disconnect with the realities of the country. Other mathematical concepts that the school system has dismissed into the complexities of designing a fishing nest, otherwise called NAS, with fringes of bamboo. Students know nothing about a fishing nest, how it's put together, the design put into it, the mathematical concepts embedded in them. There's no such thing. There's also ingenuity behind building house within cliffs that can withstand earthquakes. Talking about earthquakes, there was an earthquake in Haiti in 1842. That was May 7th, in which um, in the northern part of the country at that time, there were about 10,000 citizens, inhabitants living there, in which half of them perished. And it even got the connotation of l'événement. That's how big the event was. It was a big event. So about 5,000 people died at that time, and other infrastructures that were around also got damaged and never recovered from that point on from it. So the inhabitants there knew to build the houses within cliffs even before then, but these are not as damaging as other infrastructures that we see nowadays, built out of cement or bricks or other very tough infrastructures that you people find, and they have become more so an expression of their financial prowess, financial power that they have to show other people what they are able to build. But it's not because the history of earthquakes had taught them any lessons, because there used to be multiple earthquakes in the 1600s, in the 1700s, a few in the 1800s, and then the lessons never got learned because that was not the role of the curriculum to help identify and improve the society in which the curriculum was designed to make a difference. Even we can see the earthquake that occurred um, about 12 years ago, January 12, 2010. Hundreds of thousands of citizens died out of that. So, putting together a futon or nap to conveniently sleep on is a skill that requires mathematical calculations. That kind of sleeping unit is also popular in advanced countries in Asia. It is firm and good for one's body. There's also the large tray called lai, which is designed to dry up, dissect, etc. We will get to see that shortly. The threading of a hat, known as chapeau, or that of a chair, called chaise, similarly has a lot of mathematical calculations involved. Yet none of the items mentioned are part of the curriculum. Furthermore, the intricacies involved in drawing VV symbols are, of course, um, made to look so evil in the eyes of the Catholic Church that FIC and for FIC were and still are the ones who heavily influence and control the content of the curriculum and are known to express their hatred for all things of African descent throughout their prescribed books. That kind of miseducation system is certainly to the detriment of an entire African Haitian population. But it takes a skillful individual to draw a veve. A veve is just a drawing in the uh, in the belief of voodoo system that makes people draw these things, and show their skills, which a great many of us would not be able to find. None of the school system never took the time to involve students to do these any of those activities, to um, create group projects for them, to help improve on them, to be as creative as they could be within the same line of their culture. There's no such thing. Here's an example of a vivid drawing. This individual is doing it. As you can see, it takes a lot of skills for this to be put together. It's not just a work of art, but it has a whole lot of meanings behind it. On the left here is what I had just mentioned as a lie. This is one. And on the right side here is the chairs. These are handmade products that the people from the countryside only are able to do, to put together, unless they would be leaving their homelands or their towns and would proceed to go live in the capital. Other than that, there's not an industry that you would say produce any one of those. These are individually done, and people buy them depending upon in which area you are. These are considered to be of a lesser quality because they are made inside the country by the people who don't have the financial means to produce them on a higher level, on a higher scale. So everything that comes directly from the country tends to be perceived as of a lesser quality than an imported product from a foreign place. The value of ethnomathematics. During my teaching experience at the college, I rewrote math problems to reflect the cultural values of my different groups instead of buying into the one fit all approach. That facilitates the understanding of the subject matter. Unbeknownst to me, I was using ethnomathematics early on, not even when I thought I knew that was the connection to it. I was just doing it because I believe students who had issues grasping the concepts being taught, especially from when they had English issues with the language. So I had to make sure that I could draw parallels to what their culture would be more likely connected to the subject matter. So then the understanding just shines when that happens. And I thought that was a very good thing to do. I believe that students perform better when faced with mathematical practices that relate to their culture. A student from South America, Africa, or from the Caribbean is more likely to be familiar with soccer, football, than basketball, whereas someone from Asia, such as India, might be more familiar with cricket. That basic understanding in teaching and acknowledging one's cultural audience suffices to better explain a mathematical concept by using parallels. I also developed the habit of dispelling hearsay about supposed authors of mathematical concepts by offering students to use academic resources to research on a particular person to whom a certain concept might have been ascribed to, and a minimum of a 5-page paper as extra credit. I do that all the time, especially when it comes to the theorem of Pythagoras, knowing that there was never such thing as this guy having discovered any theorem or having come up with any theorem, not having left anything in any written evidence, right? Any written evidence that he had come up with it. So then when students look and do their research pertaining to this particular area, it's always an eye opening, and I'm always happy for them to know the truth. My message to educators is that it is important that math educators and students understand that mathematics is ethnomathematics and that their cultural contributions are vividly expressed within the subject and that it hinders progress to marginalize any group. Someone's number six can be another's number nine. Being right does not make the other wrong. It is imperative that no one group's contribution gets dismissed promote one's aberrant perception of superiority on any ground whatsoever. Eurocentrism has that subtle and at times arrogant inclination put on display. Um, it's while Europe has its contributions, other regions also have their own contributions, and none of them should not be treated as if they're not important enough. Mathematics does not have a specific address on the planet. The Thus, the stealing of mathematical concepts to further parade them in curriculum, as if Europe was the birthplace of them all, is academically, ethically, morally, and disproportionately wrong. I hope in your perception of what it is that mathematics is and the cultural um, nature embedded in it. It's nothing else but ethnomathematics is it's a mixture of so many different cultures put together, and sometimes we don't have to reinvent the wheels. We just have to go along with what's already established. Um, References can be provided to so many books that I have used for these for this presentation. So if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to address them with you or give you the references as you do request them. And also, if you find this to be relevant enough, please share. Thank you.